Hello, I'm Nan Simonson, and I preempted this live podcast on Facebook with a introductory sentence, and it was my sugar surprise. Who'da thunk? What do I mean by that? Well, I have a little story to tell you, and a conclusion that I came to, and I'm leaving you, and I'll remind you of that at the end, to come up with your own conclusions. And I'll tell you what prompted all of this in just a bit as well. I spent a week last week at, well, the number one, rated by Travel and Leisure magazine, the number one health and wellness spa in the world, in Tecate, Mexico, just on the other side of the border, Rancho La Puerta. And I was with Chef AJ as her sous chef, helping her conduct 3 cooking classes, and she was able to bring a guest and a helper, and that was me. This is the second time I did that. I did that again in maybe last October or November, and I was there in July on my own as a guest to see a cooking class of hers, to take a couple of them actually. So what is all of this about? Well, this time there was a glitch. There was what I would call a disruption, and it really surprised me. So I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about my history. I wrote Aging Powerfully. A year and a half ago, I began writing it in July of 2020, published December 27th of 2020, and it's selling better than ever. And I'm very pleased about that because I have a message. The word powerfully in that book is broken down into 10 lifestyle modalities that research has found and evidence has found can make a difference in how well we live our life and how well we manage chronic disease, especially the first 5, which are part of the College of Lifestyle Medicine. And I'm a health and wellness coach with a College of Lifestyle Medicine general practice. Actually, one of the founders of lifestyle medicine is the doctor who brought me on as a health coach about 3.5 years ago. Okay, so what is this all about? Well, in that book, I talk about, and candidly, the memoir part of the book, which is probably the first 50 pages. The book is about 175, something like that, 50, 60 pages is memoir. And I talk about the evolution of what became a lifetime eating disorder, binge purge eating disorder, and how I recovered from that after well over 50 years, and that's very hard to do, and by some accounts of experts, impossible to do. Well, it wasn't. And although I'm in a certification program, it will have been a year in June when I earned this certification with a EDIT, EDIT, eating disorder coach certification. I took this course to better understand how to work with other people who are struggling with an eating disorder, because I've not had training in this field, and this is a great program, eating disorder intuitive training, and it will help me with people who have experiences, quite frankly, different than mine was, because I recovered. I attribute my recovery to 2 things. One is that at about the time, very closely adjacent to the time that I began recovering, I began a whole food, plant-based dietary lifestyle. I began cutting out meat, eating plants, embracing carbohydrates. Now, I was born in 51. I'm 71 years old. I was born in January of 51. And so I went through the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s where carbs were the devil's spawn. You just avoided carbs or you would be fat. 70, maybe 75% of what I eat is carbohydrate. But I don't call myself a vegan, even though I am 100% and am going on 3.25 years, well, actually 3.5 years. Mostly, at least back then, there were some deviation periods, but mostly completely plant-based for almost 3.5 years. That doesn't mean, and I don't call myself a vegan per se, because as a descriptive, because there's a huge difference between eating plant-based, and I can go to any store now, I can go to even Carl's Jr., I don't want to say that word, and find Beyond Burgers and things like that. But that is industry. Thank you to them for saving the cows. Thank you to them for giving options, but that's industry continuing to mess with our food. That is not whole food. And so when I say I went whole food plant-based, if it was apple flavored, it was an apple. It wasn't an apple chip, an apple crisp, an apple leather. It was an apple. My foods went from things out of bags and factories to things out of the ground as close to nature as possible. And if you watch my YouTube videos, my YouTube cooking videos, and my channel is simply my name, Nan Simonson, but a space between first name and last name, because something else comes up if you put them together the way you would on a website. Or you go to my website and you can connect with my book, or on Amazon you can connect with my book, but my cooking channel just comes up when you click the cooking channel button on the website, which is nansimonsonaltogether.com. It's important that that distinction be made, and as I talk a little bit more, you'll see what my point is, and I'm reining myself in because I can, take off on the sidelines that I can end up staying on. Okay, so I am being trained as an eating disorder counselor. I had my own experience. Two things that made the difference was the whole food plant-based diet, which meant massive amounts. In other words, 3/4 of what I eat is a carbohydrate food, which is nature's antidepressant and appetite suppressant, if and when only it's in the whole food form. Is bread whole food? No. Bread, unless it's Ezekiel, and even then it's messed with. Those grains, I can eat a pound of cooked grains for under 600 calories. I can fill up on all whole foods and not worry about either putting on weight or messing with blood glucose, because it's all wrapped up, tied tight into and with fibers, proteins, fats, phytonutrients, phytochemicals, enzymes. Everything has to be unwoven, and it takes time, and so it hits our system like kid gloves, rather than if you were talking about a conventional bread, much harder because it's all been ground up and now it's just held together by a little bit of water and gluten. Or if you're talking about something that is so processed that it is the way most foods are, kind of little sugar bombs, but wrapped up with other things to make you think you're getting something healthy, and I'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to stay on course here. So for 3.5 years, I've been comfortably recovered from my eating disorder, and so grateful because life is so much better, and I am so much healthier. Before that, I had what was beginning to be what most people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, and I intend to live through these 70s, 80s, and 90s and beyond by maintaining these lifestyle modalities. In any case, I began experiencing what most Americans experience, and that is all kinds of chronic problems, rheumatoid arthritis, high level of cholesterol, high blood sugar. And then you go to the specialist. You've heard me say this before if you've listened to me at all, and that is, and then the specialist wants to give you pills. That's all they want to do, pills and procedures. Nobody talks to you about fixing it. I had a terrible time with gastrointestinal problems. A lot of that came down to gluten. I'm genetically sensitive to it, but I was with a gastroenterologist. He never talked to me about what I was eating. He just wanted me to keep taking these really interesting concoctions that didn't help. It was the food that made the difference. So let me get right back in here. So everything was comfortable. Then I went to Rancho La Puerta and something happened. And this is so interesting. So I'll tell you, let me make sure I'm, and I will say that I was looking back at some of my videos, my initial videos, when after the book was published, I started posting things, and some of my first cooking classes were January of, that would have been 2021. And I heard it in my descriptions, first of all, I learned how to eat this way from Chef AJ and from I'll use the word disciple because she learned from Chef AJ, disciple of hers in that way, Tammy of Nutmeg Notebook. They're very descriptive. Lots of recipes because I didn't know how to do this, and both of them are SOS free, salt, oil, sugar free. And so fine, I can do that. Cut out the oils, all of them, cut out the sugar, cut out the salt. No problem. And it was a breeze. It seemed to me to be a breeze. That second influence, by the way, was a book, Brain Over Binge, by Catherine Hansen, who taught, because she had an eating disorder, through something she learned from a man who worked with addicts who were addicted to substances, which is even harder to break because there's such a physiological response generated when they suddenly stop taking addictive substances, even though I would say it's pretty hard to stop eating addictive substances as well. Anyway, I read her book and I did her workbook, and within 3 months I was no longer binging at all. And I was on my health repairing, whole food, plant-based lifestyle and paying a lot of attention to these people that could train me. Okay, so this is the preempt. Back to Rancho La Puerta. One of the first classes that I took, and the way the rancho is set up is most of the food in the kitchen is organic. You eat whatever you want, as much as you want. It's designed to get people healthy by offering primarily plant-based food, not exclusively. They offered fish and they offered eggs from their chickens. Fish, of course, not from their salmon and sometimes tuna, not from their oceans, but chickens. And they had milk from their goats. And I didn't have any of that. And and every day, all day, any given hour, except during the lunch hour, there were 4 to 6 classes. And the classes were usually less than an hour. So all day long, there were activities from meditation to yoga nidra to sound healing. It's a magical place. Well, I went to a series of classes. Every day she did them, held by Jill Nussnow, who has a master's in science and is a registered dietitian, and she is the author of one of the books that I have used recipes from in some of my YouTube videos. And one of my favorite books is Vegan Under Pressure, because I use my Instapot a lot, and I used that book for a lot of those recipes. And her lectures were marvelous. Well, during her lecture, she talked about something that she likes a lot. She talks about how she stopped having caffeine and she prefers an herbal drink, and the preparers of this herbal drink have a large variety of herbs and I'll call it spices, healing spices, that they use in their drink, and they're all caffeine free, gluten free, heart healthy, probiotic, prebiotic, energy boosting, and it's this brand here, Ticino. So at the ranch, being this healthy, health focused place, they had the restaurant, the kitchen, and it's not a restaurant. You go in and eat and you leave. You're not paying for anything. It's all inclusive. And they have a lounge where they have coffees and beverages. And both places always had a pot, big pot of Ticino that was hot and delicious, and different flavors, because there are many, many different flavors of this herbal coffee flavored drink. Well, I had my first one, thought, oh my gosh, this is so good. And she talked about it a lot, and I thought, oh, this is lovely. But I liked it because the weather was warm, not hot, but warm, in low 70s and sunny. And we were all encouraged to bring our bottles with us, and so I had a bottle that I would fill with ice and then put into Chino, and then to kind of stabilize it all and give it a softer flavor, I put in soy milk. Well, the first time I did that, it was so delicious, surprisingly delicious. And I drank all of that, and I drink a couple of them during the day, and it didn't matter, I could have one in the evening, because again, it's herbal, and there was ashwagandha, and there was burdock, and some really nice herbal preparations in the variety of them that they offered. Well, I was then off to the races, and this is what I'm talking about. Well, I'll tell you what my revelation is, but what happened is I found that I couldn't stop drinking these, and I was eating more and more, and I was eating more and more beyond my fullness. In other words, I would eat, get so full, and keep eating, and I thought, what in the world's going on? I was curious, but I was also scared a little bit, because I thought, wait a minute, this can't be coming back. What's going on here? There was no thought ever of purging. But I thought, why am I eating to the point where night after night, and after quite a few lunches, my stomach hurt? I was so full. Now, I know with whole food plant-based, you can eat until fullness and never gain weight. I've maintained my weight. I stayed about 113, and which is lower than I was before I stopped the eating disorder, and before I began in whole food plant-based. It's gone down gradually by a pound or two a year. Not a lot, 5-6 pounds, but it's continued to go down, and it stays there, because when you're eating whole foods that are not the fattier ones, the avocado seeds and nuts, even though I have a little of those, I don't eat as many as I want of those, but I eat as much as I want from grains, beans, legumes, which are beans, and things like tubers, any kind of potato. I'm crazy about potatoes, and they satisfy, fill you up, and make you feel good. But something was wrong. Something was wrong. I had brain fog. I felt really uneasy, and I didn't feel like myself emotionally. So I didn't know what this was about, but on the last day, because they had a way for you to get your soy milk, and it was available just as soy milk in little bottles. Well, the last day, or maybe it was the second to the last, because I think I knew it and still did it, I found the carton of soy milk to pour it because it was in one of the lower refrigerators and they didn't have any on top. And I'll be darned if it wasn't soy with sugar. It was sweetened soy milk. Okay, so that's the story leading up to why we're talking about who at a thunk. This morning, and this talk, this conversation was not planned for today. I still am going to do this. Somebody, her name is Jeannie, had asked me if I would do a tour of my freezer. In other words, help people understand how I use my freezer to organize my foods and have food on hand all the time. And that was what was going to be done today. But I went up, if you have heard my talks every morning, 6 to 6:30, maybe a little after, I'm either on our local mountain running, I am now a runner, 4 miles up and down, or I am on my bike riding for an hour to an hour and a half. So I exercise every morning and I do it fasted. In other words, the last meal of the day ends at 6, maybe 6:30. I don't eat again until after all of that, usually at about 8:30. So it's about a 14-hour, what they'd call time restricted eating period. And it works for me and I love it and I always feel good. But when I saw that there was sugar in it, oh, I know what, I knew I'd lost my place. While I was up on the mountain, I did what I always do on the mountain or on my bike. I had a headset on and I was listening to a podcast. And one of my favorite people, although he's not whole food plant-based, although I don't always agree with the direction he takes people. He's not thinking longevity, he's thinking the here and now and will allow that, but he's brilliant. Dr. Andrew Huberman of the Huberman Lab. He has his own lab and staff at Stanford University. He's a professor of neurobiology, neuroscience, and ophthalmology, because the eyes are part of the brain, and so it makes sense that he is an overseer of all of that. And his podcast, let me see if I wrote down what the name of his podcast is, because I'm going to post to you a link for this. And I'm going to recommend that you consider watching it. The name is Controlling Sugar Cravings and Metabolism with Science. And his podcasts are always long. I think this one was 2 hours, but I'll do it anyway. And you know what I'll do? Tomorrow I'll do it again. So it was up and down the mountain listening, then an hour here in between doing things that I needed to do for the morning, even making breakfast and eating it. And then tomorrow I'll do the same thing, because I find the second time I really understand even better what he's referring to. And there's a point at which I'm just going to be reading the notes that I took. But what he was talking about, and this is the whole point, was that controlling, or let me get back to this. When we ingest sugar, I'm going to read this. When we ingest sugar, especially sweet liquids, and or especially high fructose corn syrup, which, by the way, is in everything. Pick up a bottle of Hunt's ketchup or Heinz ketchup. It's high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is 50% fructose, some fructose. Some people say, well, don't eat fruit because fruit is so high in fructose. High fructose corn syrup is 50%. Fruit is anywhere from 2 to 10% fructose. And remember what I said earlier, like Whole Foods, it's bound up in that fruit. So there's a very soft release of that fructose, that sugar, into our bloodstream, which makes a huge difference. I'll finish this sentence. When you ingest sugar, especially sweet liquids, especially high fructose corn syrup, it sets up neural pathways that lead to wanting more sugar foods. It makes all foods more tempting, more appealing, and it makes you want to eat more. And as I was listening on the mountain, this was the base of the mountain pretty much, because this was his starting premise. I thought, oh my gosh, is that what happened? So let's listen on. I wonder also if that's why, in spite of dozens of therapists, in spite of dozens, not dozens, in spite of probably a dozen different medications that I was prescribed throughout my years with an eating disorder from age 15 until I was 67. I couldn't get on top of it. Um, if the addictive effect of something is strong enough, and the person is what does he say? Is, I'm going to use the word weak enough, but he never said that. He said especially sensitive to it, and some that are especially sensitive to the effects of sugar, the neurological, physiological effects of sugar, include people with ADHD, which I have. It was finally tested in my later years in college, and big time learning disorders and dyslexia. And I think back to how difficult school was, especially with my inability to follow things that most students found very, very easy. And even back then, because the eating disorder began at 15, even then, I wonder how much of that, these waves of binging on the foods that lit up my brain in the worst ways, had on that. I don't know, but those with ADHD are even more affected by this and find it even more difficult to walk away from it. Okay, so I'll get back to what I'm attempting to get through quickly, and obviously I'm not. Okay, so it certainly had my attention, and these are some of the things he talked about, and I'm not going to digest and give you his information. I'm suggesting you listen to it, but if this resonates with you, if you are thinking maybe what I'm thinking, wait a minute, and this was a 1 week period, I was out of myself. I was doing what I'm not doing and haven't done for a long, long time. I was eating way too much. I never felt satisfied. I would eat until I was so full I felt sick almost every night and almost every lunch, and I couldn't stop regardless of why, or regardless of what I promised myself. Those were like my old binge days. For an entire week at this spa, I'm thinking, what's going on? That sugar, several times during the day, even in relatively small quantities, but maybe it wasn't that small of a quantity, had already hijacked the areas of my brain and my body that caused a lot of trouble. Okay, so these are some of the mechanisms. There's something called, I love, it's fun to listen to him, and he will geek out on things, but he'll say to you, you don't have to remember this, I'm just telling you, because he's a professor and he has a lot of people who listen who are also in the academic world. Something called, and love this word, nucleus of the solitary tract. The nucleus of the solitary tract will affect something called neuropod cells. Isn't that great too? And I'll listen again and really understand what these means, or what these mean. And they send a message to the brain: eat more sugar, eat more, and eat more food. They trigger a craving in us. Sugar is hidden, as I said earlier, in savory foods and salty foods to get us to eat more of them. And when we eat more of them, we want more of them. This is all part of what industry knows. They spent billions in research, and they'll set us up for craving, because that's what the neuropod cells will oversee in terms of what they're there for. Um, when we stay, and this was interesting, when we stay away from sweet things, because that's what I've learned to do. I've learned that I don't eat oil, salt, and refined sugar. That's a done deal. The sweet things that I eat are bound up rather tightly in fiber, maybe in fat from seeds and nuts, but never with refined sugar, but with some extra sweetness from dates. That's what I use as a sweetener. Even that, if I have too much of a dessert that is whole food plant based, I'll think about it too much. I'll want it too much. And what he said here is the longer that you stay away from that food, when you finally have it, the higher the dopamine hit and the higher the response, not just from dopamine, the more pleasurable it tastes because you've been craving it. The higher the dopamine hit, the stronger the effect of the microbiome, because those bacteria that love that stuff, if they're still alive, um, are going to, because our gut bacteria does send messages to us as well and help set up cravings, but also from one more pathway that I'll talk about in just a second. And he used the word diabolical, and I love that. He said the brain pleasure pathway, this all affects in a diabolical way, in other words, sinister. The third level, or the third pathway that affects the way these things change our body and change our brain, is that our blood, the glucose and the blood sugar affects our neurons, and it affects our neurons that then affect the way we think. So, as he said, the more of this stuff you have, the less in control you will be of the way you react around it. It is, you can use the word hijacking. So the three pathways make us want more. Simple substitutions and modifications can work to help modify these pathways. So this wasn't a gloomy pronouncement. These were factual. And then he went on to talk about some things that will make a difference, that can help leverage the or that we can help leverage the glycemic index. If you're not familiar with the glycemic index, it is a measure of the effect of glucose on individuals and their blood sugar reading postprandial, and postprandial means after a meal. If there's a sharp rise in blood sugar, there's also going to be a sharp rise in dopamine, and that dopamine, and he talks about dopamine a lot. Listen to his podcasts. It's so fascinating, because this isn't opinion. This is neuroscience. This is the way your brain and body work. But if one of the things about dopamine is that it's not just a reward neurotransmitter. It's a directive neurotransmitter. In other words, it directs our attention and it directs our drive towards something, not just once we get it, raising the pleasure mode. So once the dopamine is involved, you have that still one more additional, very hard to dissuade drive. We're hardwired also biologically to eat sweets. Babies are hardwired, and there's sugars in milk so that the babies will want to nurse. And one of the ways to beat a blood sugar spike that also spikes the dopamine and affects us in ways that we've been talking about in our systems is to bind it. One of the best ways is to bind it with fiber. And then I'll go back to as he's talking about other modalities like glucosamine and berberine and other substances or other supplements, all I could keep thinking, and it's not his audience, whole food plant-based is not his audience, and all I could keep thinking of was, come on, Dr. Huberman, just talk about whole food. We don't have to do, and I think about this all the time when I'm listening to people talk about what supplements can do to ameliorate certain problems. I think to myself, why don't you just get it from the food, where you get also thousands of other elements that have not even been identified yet. We don't know everything that food does for us, but what we do know is that it's a package. That's one of the reasons I don't take much of anything in terms of supplements, because you add something to the package that's not there. It's having to marshal something to modify it. And if it doesn't have what it needs to modify it, the whole thing's thrown into off balance. T. Colin Campbell, who I got a plant-based certification through Cornell University from, talked all the time about how our body is a symphony. It's not something that we can break down and simply say, well, vitamin C is good for a cold. Here, take 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C and think that our body is going to be able to handle that. Well, it doesn't really work that way in most cases. Okay, so he even talked about using less refined sugars. Well, hello, date paste, which is dates ground up in water. And he does tilt his hat to Dr. Lustig. If you've listened to Dr. Lustig, he is a physician who wrote, I can't remember the name of his book, but it's all about what sugar does to our body and our brain. New nutrition neuroscience says that, or new nutritional neuroscience says that we can condition our preferences. And this is what I have to tell people all the time, that if you make one of my recipes and it doesn't have enough flavor, my guess is that you're coming off highly processed food, fast food, restaurant food, where everything you're getting is purposely put together to light up your neurotransmitters, not to give you health. And as you titrate away from the ultra sweet, ultra salty, and all those oils, then clean food tastes much better to you. And this was something that he acknowledged as well. He also said that to ameliorate the effects on blood glucose of sweet foods, to help modify these effects of our systems with high sugar meals or high sweet meals, you can add lime or lemon or even vinegar after a meal or during a meal to help reduce the effect, because our body sees that as a balancing act, and it will have a softer effect on us physiologically. And he said cinnamon will do the same thing, but he said be very careful about cinnamon because it has a element in it called coumadin, and we shouldn't ever take more than 1 to 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon a day. Well, I can't imagine anyone having that much, but he was quite, he even repeated it. Don't overdo on cinnamon because coumadin can be very dangerous. He also reminded us of something he has said before, and that is sleep deprivation can affect our appetite and make us want more sugar for stimulation and more food because we're bored and because we're numb from a lack of sleep. And I think that's all I want to say. I had a revelation. I had a situation that affected me for an entire week. Didn't understand it. I just knew I was totally off. This morning I had a revelation that helped me understand what was going on. I was going to say physically, but also mentally, but also emotionally. I wasn't myself during the week, and I couldn't understand why. And because it had nuances of a lack of control with food, I thought, and I've had a history of that, I thought, oh man, don't let this be so. And you know what it was? It was the sugar. And now I tilt my hat with more emphasis to Dr. Ludwig. I appreciate that much more the admonition to stay away from simple sugars. I'll still have my fruit, my fructose tied up with my fruit. I eat 2 or 3 fruit a day. I'll still have my very high carbohydrate diet because that's all tied up in food and have never had a problem with that. This was the first time I've experienced feelings that I used to have when I was in my eating disorder, and now I understand and I feel sorry and sad that I had no inkling that I was playing a fiddle that was never going to get the song right because I didn't know how. I didn't know what to do. I simply kept feeding that monster again and again, and it would rear its ugly head, and this went on for decades. Too bad. Too bad. And that's why I have now a story to tell and a message and a mission. At 71, I'm hoping to make a difference to others in some very simple ways. The adoption of lifestyle as medicine pillars, the pillars of health as ascribed by the College of Lifestyle Medicine are sleep enough, make sure you are regularly de-stressing, relaxing, sleep enough, 7 to 9 hours a day, move enough, minimum a half an hour every day. The more the better. It is so good to move and you'll fall in love with that. And then nutrition. And the recommendation by the College of Lifestyle Medicine is whole food, plant-based, or just as near as you can to eating foods as close to nature as possible, of the plant kind. I hope you're having a great day. I know I am, and I thank you for your time and energy. I'm going to post this podcast, and when you have a chance, listen to it. And thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.